Okay, when I hear the word networking, I feel like this inner allergic reaction. Do you? I get this image of walking into a hotel room, like one of those conference hotel rooms, and there's everyone standing around in small groups with name tags, and everybody has someone to talk to except for me. Okay, that's the image. I'm probably completely dating myself with this networking image, but this is the image that I get. And it's just like causes this inner cringe. And I don't think I've met anyone in my professional career who, when the term networking comes up, they go, yes, networking. So if this is you, I'm really excited that you're tuning in today because my guest today is going to fundamentally shift how you think of networking. And if you think this is an empty promise, it is not. She has done this for me. I've known her for a while, so I'm a very solid testimonial on it. In fact, what I love about our guest today is that, in her own words, her entire career story is one of transformation through networking. Wow, that's cool. My guest is Kelly Hoey, and she's a networking expert and coach, and she's an author of an awesome book, which I've read twice, called Build Your Dream Network, Forging Powerful Relationships in a Hyper-Connected World. Kelly's career has evolved from being a lawyer to manager to founder to investor to author, speaker, and coach, all transformations that she credits to networking. So, Kelly, welcome to the Reinventability podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So let's jump right in. You say, in your own words, that your entire career has been a story of transformation through networking. What was the first major transformation in your career?
The first major one was moving from being a lawyer into the management side of law firms. Now, that may not sound like a big transformation, but it was at a time where the people hiring in those roles did not think someone like me was qualified to be in that role. And the roles were filled by, sort of a quiet, silent little network that I had to make myself, insert myself into. So I had to, in terms of making that change, first of all, I had to figure out that those roles were possible. I had to figure out what kind of skill set I had. I needed to kind of explore within my network what was possible. And that was the first change, the first big one.
Let me ask you a question right about that. How did you decide to make that change? Is it because you were really unhappy in your role, or you were just needed a different challenge? And then I'd love to hear how you actually went about, because I think this is often where people get stuck. Like, I want to have a different role even in my current company. Like, what do you mean by exploring the internal network? So what was the impetus for the transformation? And then how did you actually go about figuring out those skills in that network?
So the first thing I did was trying to figure out, am I unhappy being a lawyer? Is it this work environment, or is it the job itself? So I went and talked to headhunters, interviewed at other firms, interviewed in-house, and was then just said, forget it. That's not going to solve my career unhappiness, just moving to another firm or going in-house. So then I sat down and literally did one of those exercises of, okay, what rocks my world in this office, where I work? What do I enjoy about my job? What makes me happy? What part of this sucks? What don't I want to do anymore? And from that, I narrowed down kind of interactions and tasks and things that I enjoyed. And then I said to myself, is there a role within a professional service firm environment where I could do this? From there, I started to explore what were some of these supportive roles and where were there people I had worked with before? Because at this point, it was the third law firm I had worked in. So there was two other firms with former colleagues that I could reach out and say, hey, I see you made a change, or I see your firm has this type of role. Can you introduce me to this person? I want to understand how they got into the role they're in. So using the network, I sort of discovered what the roles were talk to people who had made these transitions into these various roles, from recruiting to marketing to professional development, before really narrowing down and going, all right, it's going to be professional development. That's the role I want to go and get myself into.
One of the things you just said, it got me thinking about this. And again, it might be obvious to you, but when I think of networking, and maybe this is what causes so much agita for so many people, it always feels like networking is you asking for something. But what you're talking about in your networking is you were reaching out to learn about people's experiences, to learn how they got into the role they're in, to learn about what they do. And people, we love to talk about ourselves, don't we? So I want you to talk a little bit about this, because I think this, for me, this presents networking in a really beautiful light of reaching out to learn.
Yes, I'm going to say that idea of an ask and needing something holds so many people back. And here's where I looked at it. I really thought about, what's the information I need? Who is the best person to deliver that information? What is the clearest, most precise ask so that they can get me an answer? And by that, I mean literally emailing someone and saying, I see you made this change. I'd like to know how you made this change. Not a, hey, it's been a while, could we catch up? No, I went right to the heart of the matter. I should also step aside and say, I was able to reach out to people who I had worked with as a colleague. So that foundation of being a good colleague, like a good classmate, like the kind of person you would want to help. And there is social science that even if there has been a lapse of time, if there was warm bonds from when we had spent time together, it rushes back. Versus if you have been the office jerk, people are going to remember that 5 minutes later and 5 years later. So you increase the likelihood of people wanting to help you if you just kind of show up every day for them, even if it isn't what you think in magical big ways. So that really clear ask on, what's the information I want to know? Who's the best person to ask? Let me just email ask and ask them a question. And then
okay,
in terms
let's
of
dive
that,
into this. Sorry.
Don't let me
because
forget the
you know
networking
what I'm
give
going to
on
ask
this.
you.
Oh.
You know what I'm going to ask you, because when you and I talked, we talked about this. This is actually a really hard part. And I'm raising my hand. It's hard for me often to ask, to figure out what you want, to tell yourself the truth about what you want, and then to courageously ask, direct ask of what you want. Not, as you say, would love to catch up and pick your brain and but to literally directly ask. This is really, really hard. First, Kelly, why is it so hard for us to ask for what we want? Why?
Because we're getting the fear of rejection. That's like, Neanderthal brain. We're going to get, rejected by the tribe. But this is where I'm like, break it down. Like, what is the other person capable of? I mean, the other piece on this, like why it's hard, Nataly, and you and I, this is where we can really go off on a tangent and geek out, because we both love, Dr. James Doty and, his research and work. As he points out, right, we have like 10 million bits of data being processed by our conscious brain every second. And our brain, our mind is only able to process 50, right? 10 million to 50. So the brain is this cognitive miser that wants to conserve energy, right? If you reach out and ask someone for something general, or you don't ask, you're like, let's just catch up. Here's some times, like it's big, broad, and general. That other person's brain is like, danger, danger, Will Robinson. We don't have time or energy for that. Shut it down. So you cut through that, I would say evolutionary tendency when you are specific and you think about what the other person is capable and most powerfully positioned to deliver. Make it easy for them, because you got to get through their brain that's telling them they have no time for this.
I love that we're going on this tangent because I don't actually think this is a tangent. And hey, it's my show. We get to go on a tangent. But I think this is actually at the very, very core of why people say they hate networking. I don't think they hate networking. I think when people say I hate networking, they say I am uncomfortable with reaching out to people and asking for things. And of course, because they could say no, right? And so Kelly's talking about James Doty, who is we're both giant fans. He's the author of Into the Magic Shop and Mind Magic most recently. He's a neuroscientist who is really focused on understanding the heart-brain connection and compassion in the brain. And we're both giant fans. But what you're talking about, Kelly, is so important to understand, because I think that, I'm just going to be honest with myself. When I am reaching out to someone and I have this thing like I don't want to bother them. So instead of giving the specific ask, I make it this I think I'm being light touch. I think I'm being, just want to connect with you, Kelly, and catch up. And so I think I'm actually doing the nice thing, the kind thing. But what you're saying is that's the opposite. By sending these generic requests, it's causing a lot of struggle on their brain's part. And eventually the brain's like, yeah, I don't know what to do with this. You know what, Nataly, I'm sorry, I don't have the time. Whereas, so in other words, being specific in your ask is an act of kindness.
Huge act of generosity and networking kindness. Absolutely. Because you know why that other person is so uniquely placed to answer your question. It's why I say to people, this is like the good stalking you do on the internet. If someone wanted to ask you a question, right, they should listen to your podcast episodes. Maybe they should read your books. Maybe they should listen to some other interviews so that they can ask you a better question versus one they could find if they read your bio on your website. And sometimes people say to me, but Kelly, then I'm like, no. We're not putting out this content for it to be ignored. This is not creepy. This is helpful because then when someone reaches out and says, Nataly, I've read this, but here's what I don't understand. Can you explain how you did this shift or how you made this connection? And they ask that specific question. You're like, okay, they put in the effort. This tells me something about them. 2, this is a specific question I can answer. My brain is not giving me a big sigh thinking, oh my God, all the work. Why didn't they just read this? And, oh, okay, I could tell them all that. Oh no, this is all too much effort. I'm putting this as spam. I'm ignoring it, right? You're now like, okay, I can answer this question. And then the third piece on it, by just asking the question, it gives the recipient the opportunity to decide how to answer it. You're getting the same networking impact in my mind. So you don't need the 15-minute coffee break, coffee chat, which is never 15 minutes. You do not need to jump on a Zoom. You may get a question and you say to the person, here's your answer. Just did a podcast, last week that was released this morning. At 30 minutes in, I go into quite a lot of detail on this. If you've got questions after that, email me back. Or you could say, here's the answer, and type them an answer. Or you could say, we should talk because that's going to be the fastest way. Whatever it may be, you get to decide. And as the person who is sort of the target of the networking, I got to tell you, I so appreciate it when people ask that way and they leave it to me to decide. And when I've talked to other very busy, in-demand people, they feel precisely the same way because there's another thing going on in our brains. So if anyone's a runner, they know about that runner's high. There's a helper's high.
Yes.
We like to mentor. We like to help. We like that little adrenaline rush, right? We like that dopamine hit. Make it easy for us to help you. And then the big piece on this, and you're going to like, oh, got to get in that one. Your next act of networking generosity, when someone gives you advice or guidance or helps you out, is you got to follow up with them. Circle back, let them know what you did with the advice.
Right now, I'm going to summarize these points because they're so useful. But right now, I'm just patting myself on the back as a good mama because my daughter, Mia, is 20. She's an incoming junior in college. And, she's doing a lot of networking because she's planning to go to medical school. So we're connecting her to our friends who are doctors, just so she can learn. And this is literally, I'm like, Mia, you have a conversation, you follow up. First of all, you always follow up with a thank you, but then you follow up and you tell them, what did you do with what they shared? Did you check out that article? Did you check out that internship? Did you have another conversation with somebody in their field that they suggested? And I just say it nonstop. So right now I just feel really, really smart as a mom. Thanks, Kelly. I feel like we've accomplished the main goal we had here, which is to make me feel good about myself as a mom. But no, I really mean it. But I just think like gold right there, gold, everyone. So do your homework, ask a very specific question. Make sure this is the person to answer this question, and then ask the specific question. So it's not an act of kindness to say, hey, just want to catch up. That's just vagueness that doesn't help them. And then when you ask the question, leave it up to them for how they want to answer it. So don't say, let's catch up over Zoom. Can I have 15 minutes? Ask the question the person's smart enough to figure out, and then follow up. I always say, write a thank you note. And in your thank you note, this is Nataly advice. So hopefully Kelly, the networking expert, approves. I always tell Mia, when you write a thank you note, put a couple of things as thank you. And actually like, here are 2 things that I took away and I'm going to follow up on. I love getting those because then I feel really heard. And then circle back after you've done those things, or if you've had some time, circle back. Okay, this is networking gold. All right, Kelly, I want to go back to your career and your reinvention using your network. So, okay, now you're in a management role and you are, I know your path a few years later, you are managing people at an organization. And then you are asked to do something quite different. Build an alumni network, which eventually leads you on this networking path. Can you talk about that transformation?
Yeah, I mean, I'd literally hit, kind of the proverbial glass ceiling in the department I was in. And my boss and I sat down and it was like, okay, what's next? Do you find a role in another firm doing this? Here's a couple of opportunities here. Because I had networked internally across departments and across, offices and things within the global firm I was at, the head of marketing said, I'll take you. I've got something, come on down to marketing and take on this role to build an alumni program. But what I was leaving was an established program that I had built where I had, staff and budget, and I was in an office with a door that closed, to a department where I had a cubicle, a paperclip, and a stick of gum, and a big mandate to build a global alumni program. What I realized overnight was my career happiness again completely, did, a flip. I went from, okay, I've tapped out, I can do this, to really being energized. I credit that to having a 360 review, and we can discuss the ins and outs of that. But it was a 360 review where I realized, okay, I'm good at managing people, but I don't love it. I can do this thing, but I don't love doing this thing. What is it that I love? Being given a big challenge and being, told to do something big and then no resources and trying to figure out a way to make that happen. Like, that was exciting to me. And so that was the next big transformation. It also led me to really heavily networking outside the firm because I needed to find examples of people who had built alumni type networks on the basis of the enthusiasm of the membership versus a top down, we're going to entice you to be involved because of, parties and perks and that kind of thing.
Okay, so before you talk about that, because I think there's a lot of lessons there, I think the point you brought up about the 360, and that for everyone who may not know, a 360, I had to go through this. I think the first time I had to do it, it might have been at McKinsey. very early in my career. So actually, I'm grateful for that because I just assumed this is what happens. Like it was never new to me. I was like, oh, this is like a test for adults. That was my post-college brain. So a 360, if you don't know what it is a process where essentially you get feedback from people who are above you in an organization, people you lead, people your level. So it's 360 because it's all around kind of, it gives you a view of yourself from a lot of these other people's lenses. And I just want to pause on that because Kelly, you're one of the few people I've ever met who is excited about a 360. Usually people approach 360 with the same degree of enthusiasm that they approach the word networking, like, ew.
But I was horrified at the thought of getting one. Horrified. Like
and what was the gift?
It was the last thing I wanted, and it turned into a gift, an absolute gift, because of that feedback. And so if you're in an organization where they offer these things, like run to it with, screaming enthusiasm, because you learn so much about yourself. If I had not had that 360 review, I probably, if you'd asked me the question, hey, Kelly, were you a good manager? I would have said to you, not the worst, not the best. Oh, no, I'm a fantastic manager. I don't enjoy it. That is a different place to start thinking about a career transformation. And as I like to say, like sometimes your network sees more in you than you see in yourself. So they may see possibilities, but they also may be, championing something that you sort of say, great, I'm glad that they love that I am so capable of this thing. And it's not the skill set that, moves me, to reach and high, climb higher in my career.
Yeah. And there's 2 points I want to pull on there. The first is just the value of using your network. And again, I also just want to something that's coming up for me is when my colleagues, I don't, in my current company, I don't think of them as my network, but they are. Somehow I always think network is outside, but all of the colleagues in your current environment are part of your network. So I just think that's one small point. But we are not, what you're essentially saying is we are not great judges of our gifts and abilities. We have this negativity bias, right, in our brain. Everyone I've ever worked with, they can tell me all the things they're not good at. They have a hard time telling me what they're brilliant at, right? So that's how, we are. So we need the lenses, the perspectives of others to illuminate for us what our gifts are. But I think a bigger point there, and I want to pause on that because I think it's very important. Just because you are great at something, just because you're good at something as perceived by others, doesn't mean that that is what you should be doing. Kelly, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Gay Henricks, who wrote, he kind of created this concept of zone of genius.
I'm familiar with that, but dive in.
Yes. So I recommended for everyone, he has a couple of books, the book that I've read several times called The Big Leap. And so he talks about that we have these different zones, right? And he actually has 4, I think, zone of competence. I forget what the first one, but there's a zone, maybe incompetence, zone of competence, zone of excellence, which is what you're describing, something you are really good at, and could do really well, like being a manager of people, like zone of excellence. But then there's the zone of genius. And zone of genius is something that only you are uniquely capable of doing, not only capable of doing, but it is something you love. It is something that when you do it, it doesn't really feel like that much effort, right? And his whole principle is that the more that we can move into our zone of genius, that amplifies our impact, and that's how we flourish. But what he talks about that made me think of it is that a lot of people in our current life are very happy when we stay in our zone of excellence. They are very happy when we're doing that thing that we're really good at. And it takes a lot of courage and a lot of self-awareness to recognize I'm good at this thing. I'm really good at this thing, but it doesn't make me happy. It doesn't fulfill me. It is not really tapping into that sense of aliveness, as I call it, and to shift into your zone of genius. So that's what you're making me think of. And so it's on one hand very useful to hear what others think we're good at. But I think at the same time, as I'm hearing you say, it's important to not have that as your only guidance for what you do.
Right. Well, and I also think too, like we can discount our talents and confuse something that we don't enjoy but are good at as something that we're not good at.
Yes.
Versus, you know what? I am good at this, but I don't enjoy it. Okay. That gets you to a different place. All right, what do I enjoy? What would
Yes.
be? It also gives you a kind of a fallback. You're like, okay, I can go and take a greater risk knowing that I could go back and do this other thing.
You know, as you're saying this, this is one of my inspirations for starting this podcast is so many people tell me, oh, Nataly, I'm really bad at change. I am really bad at change. You're good at change. I am bad at change. Nobody is bad at change because as human beings, we are actually excellent at change. That's all we do: change, adapt, learn. So when people say I'm bad at change, they're not bad at change. They're saying I don't like change. I am uncomfortable at change, but everyone is brilliant at change. And so one of my inspirations for creating this podcast is to help people recognize, first of all, you don't have to love it to be good at it, but also to shift the mindset. So that's what you're talking about. And I think it's really important. Okay, let's go back to your transformation. So you have to build this alumni network for a large company without a budget. Fun. So you start trying to figure out, because you love building things, like, how do I do this? And what helps you is your network. Talk about that.
Well, it helped having a network of people within the firm who would take my calls and I could leverage, and they had bigger budgets and resources and I could use them. I want to say it helped that I'm curious about other people because it enabled me to have conversations, to find out. It helped that I had been in the prior role that I was in, because some of the people who had left the firm and now were alums were those whose careers I was managing, just a few years before. So they would still take my call. And then looking outside the firm to say, where is there a model of an alumni type program where this enthusiasm for the network bubbles from the bottom rather than being poured down from the top. And I zeroed in on a network, a global business network for women, that was originally founded as a informal alumni group of women who had left Goldman Sachs, the big Wall Street investment banking firm. And so tongue-in-cheek name of it was 85 Broads, which was the Goldman Sachs old headquarters down on Wall Street. And I joined and then immediately became very, very active in the network. If there was something I could do, I did it because I wanted to understand what their magic was. Why did this thing have like a perpetual motion machine with a very small staff? Why was it so vibrant? And is there anything I could learn from that? And just my activity brought who I was to the attention of the founder. And 6 to 9 months in my membership, she called and asked me if I would think about coming in, being the first president of the network. So, and that, in terms for me, I mean, my activity in the network was driven by my desire to learn and do the job I was doing. But that was a really big transformation, going back to thinking about like your network sees more in you than you see in yourself. I saw myself and my career very solidly in professional services. I understand that world. I can stay in that world. That's, maybe I leave doing the alumni program for this professional services firm and I go over to another one. I leave the law and I go over to consulting. Like, that's what my little viewpoint was. And by going and being the president of this global business network, having Janet, the founder, see me in a different light was huge, because that network and that opportunity completely cracked open my career.
I think it's such a gift. And as you're talking, and I wonder if our listeners are doing this too, I just inadvertently started to think of people in my career journey who did that for me. And I think it's a really powerful exercise to think back in your career to those moments, to those people who saw something in you and gave you that insight or an opportunity to use it. Because remembering that, I think, is a powerful encouragement that if you are in a pivot point, that to do that again, to remind you how connecting with people who know you and taking their insights and maybe even asking them this question of, hey, you know me really well. And I've kind of seen myself in this career path. I wonder if you have a different insight. Is that how you see me? Getting their insight, I think, is really powerful. But yeah, it just made me, listening to just made me feel very grateful to those people just who came to mind, who shifted my understanding of what I was doing and what I was capable of simply by giving me an opportunity to do it. And at the time, I wasn't aware of that. It's only in retrospect. So I want to ask you a couple of kind of targeted networking questions, but I want you to finish your career arc. So it cracked open your career, and now here you are. You're running this big networking organization. Was that how you fell in love with helping people network and connect better?
You know what? I think, go back to something you had said earlier,
Yeah.
in terms of, sort of our skills and our talents and this sort of thing. Sometimes we are so close to what we're good at, we don't even see it. And I remember my boss when I was in the professional development role. So this would have been probably 2007-ish. And he said to me, you need to tell people how you do this. And by this, he was referring to networking. He's like, because you do this differently than other people. And I remember looking at him, telling him what an idiot he was. And that was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. It's amazing I wasn't fired. But anyway, we had a great relationship. And I was like, because I was like, so much of like, doesn't everyone do it this way? What's the big deal here? And those words rang true then later when I left, was the president of the business network for a year and realized okay, this kind of doing my own thing, this having this more, entrepreneurial, that led to co-founding a startup accelerator because again, my activity, my visibility, people seeing what I could do, not just talking about what I could do, but seeing my skills in action led to my two co-founders approaching me and saying, we need your skill set. And then that led to sort of other kind of startup-y roles and bits and bobs until I finally sort of sat there and said, what is the common thread? What is the thing? All right. Oh, the network explains this all. Maybe I should write about this. So that's how it came about. But no, when originally, I wasn't like, hey, I want to be the networking queen. Never words out of my mouth. Never a thought in terms of this thing being the driver of my career this way. But yeah, I do sort of look back and think about my conversation with my boss, Tim Whitney, and it still makes me laugh.
I love that. I love that. Thank you good thing you weren't fired. But a couple of things that you said, I think, are really important. And the last one, I think, it's one of my core kind of reinvention philosophies, is that this common thread, it takes action to have clarity on it. A lot of times when I mentor someone at a pivot point, they say, well, Nataly, I'm just, I'm unhappy where I am. Or they say, I love my job. I love where I am, but I've done the same thing for 20 years. I'm in a large company. There's probably other things I could do, but I have no idea how to even think about it. And they tell me they feel like they need to have a plan before they take any step. They're like, well, I need to figure it out. And I always say you cannot figure it out before you take action. Clarity emerges from taking action. And I think it's one of the biggest blockers that I see when I work with people, where they feel like they need to have the answer before they take an action. Like, I want to go into networking business, so this is the action, but it's actually the flip. It's the opposite. You have to start taking action, and it's not going to be perfect. And some of it is going to take you in the wrong direction. But without action, you can't learn. You can't learn what you like and what you don't. You can't learn what you're good at and you don't. You can't think yourself into it. So clarity emerges through actions. And I love that you call it this, the through line, but it only emerges because you did all those different things. If you were still sitting there with your arms crossed, trying to think of the perfect path, there's no way you would have drawn this path, because it emerged by you taking action. And I think it's one of the most important kind of foundations to really like creating work that you love, is taking action before you have a plan.
Yeah, I would say I'm sort of like, so doing like the yes, and it's given how, with all so much innovation, so much disruption, we don't know, don't know what that next thing is going to be. It may just emerge. So how do you position yourself? I think you position yourself by people knowing what you're capable of. And that part of that might be your ability to adapt. It might be ability to bring new skills or new insights into something. I think if you volunteer, if you sign up for different projects, you can experiment. I mean, I did a lot of stuff in the startup world, and I think of people who might be interested in working in innovation, but think, oh, I don't know where to start. Go and mentor. That give you a taste and a flavor. Or you might be saying, oh, I don't want to do sales anymore. I want to do this. Well, go and use that in this other environment where they don't carry the baggage of this legacy of the thing that you want to leave behind. But find those little opportunities to kind of test the waters and have opportunities to try out, see if the jacket fits, or if, you try it and you're like, okay, I kind of suck at this, Right.
Yeah, good learning.
I'm glad I experimented on it, and we won't be going back and doing that again.
That's right. New direction. And I think part of it, and this is, you've mentioned it a couple of times, but even going back to, when you went in the same firm from managing people to being asked to run this alumni network, I think often when I say the word reinvention, people think, oh, I got to burn it all down. I got to quit my job and sell my house and move to Nepal and, become a painter. You can reinvent in your role. You can reinvent in your company. You can reinvent in your organization. But it requires you to have this mindset of possibility and learning and experiments. You don't have to burn it down.
Right. And relationships. So one of the key things within any organization is where, you have your sort of zone of possibility within the department that you're in, or the function you're in, and your own mindset, but you expand that zone of possibility when other people know what you're capable of. So who are you collaborating with? Who can you go and get insights from? Who can you pull into your projects? Who can you share ideas with? Maybe your company has got, volunteer days. Well, you could volunteer and do a project with the people you see every day, or you could volunteer with a completely different group and kind of get your name and what you're, hey, they're a team player. Hey, they've worked on this. Maybe they want to come over. We've got an opening. So where are some ways that you can get your talents shining in front of other people?
I love this. And I'm going to use an example of my husband, which is, again, it's my show. I get to do it. Hi, Avi. So my husband, Avi, he's at Amazon. And when he started there a few years ago, it's a giant organization, right? It's like pretty overwhelming. And I've worked at Microsoft and McKinsey, you started, it doesn't matter which level you're coming in. It's like a country. And you're like, how do I even? And so one of the things he did pretty early on is he volunteered when they have onboarding for new hires. They have someone from Amazon, give them the lay of the land in a virtual webinar. Like, here's the intranet and here's how this works. And so they take volunteers, and he volunteered to do this because he loves to speak. He loves nurturing people. And so he did it maybe a couple times. And then people noticed that he's really great at this. He's really great at speaking. So then people started to ask him to do other webinars for sales teams, for customers. And then he went on their big stage during their big event. And now Avi is known as someone who, wow, Avi'd be really great. And he loves it and he's great at it. But it came out of him just raising his hand and saying, I'll volunteer. I'll do this. Because when I joined, I was like, OMG, let me help. And so I just think it's such again, I love embarrassing my own husband. Actually, I don't think it's embarrassing. I think I'm singing accolades, but it's such a great example of what you're saying, because I think, and that to me is another gift of you, Kelly. Like, you've gotten me over the years, even as like I read your book, to not just think of networking as like, I reach out to ask you something. Networking is also when you connect with people and they see you in your element. Networking is collaborating with people on a project or raising your hand to volunteer. That's all networking, because you're building relationships and people get to see, as you said, what you're capable of. So when you need their insight or they have an opportunity, they think of you.
Well, everyone says they hate networking, or they hate this, the schmoozing networking. Yet that's what we do, right? We reach out to people when, desperation, like, oh my God, I need a new job. Like as opposed to, how are you showing up every day? And I really strongly encourage people, like, think about how you show up every day for your network. Because for me, networking is every single human interaction. So can you leave a comment on Instagram? Can you repost someone's LinkedIn? Can you send a text that wishes someone a happy birthday? Comment on a career milestone, send a thank you note, hold a door, like, right? Oh, you see an article, pass it on. You listen to this podcast and you think, oh, this reminds me of so-and-so. Guess what? Tell so-and-so you were listening to this podcast episode and it made you think of them. That makes all the difference in the world. It does not need to be the awkwardness where our mind goes of some big room filled with strangers, bad glass of wine, some, food on a, stuck on a skewer that you're so scared you're going to like stab yourself with. And, how are you supposed to meet people and you don't, like, it's not that. That is one tiny slice of our opportunities as human beings to connect with each other.
I love what you just said. Networking is how you show up every day. I've read a lot of your work, but I'm sure you've said this, but it really just stuck with me. I think that's really powerful, which brings me to, so in every episode, we take a listener question, and actually I have a couple that I'm looking at to choose for you. But I think I'm going to ask you this one. So I'm going to ask you this listener question. And the question is, and it's from Jill, the question is, I'm really shy. And this actually came in, not even to the episodes, this is an email I got. And I was like, this is perfect. So I'm really shy. I tend to be really shy, quiet, and introverted, although I'm a really kind and generous person. I feel really stuck in the role in my company where I've been for 11 years. And I'd love to explore other roles, but I feel really awkward even reaching out to my colleagues in other departments to talk to them. Do you have a suggestion for how I can internally overcome this awkwardness? Because I actually like to have the conversations, but what she was writing, that she just feels really shy to reach out. So I'd love if you could answer her, because I can just see all our listeners' ears perk up. We've all been there.
Well, the short answer is, read the case study in Build Your Dream Network of a guy by the name of Joe Styler.
Joe Styler. Okay, so in Kelly's book, in Kelly's book, which is, again, we'll put it in the show notes, called Build Your Dream Network. And the case, say his name again.
His name is Joe Styler. And his case study, I will find the page number so you can put it in the show notes. So Joe is an introvert, and he is one of the best network builders I have ever met. So distinguish between somebody who draws their energy from talking to other people, an extrovert, they need, right? That is their need. Extract from that, like, the idea that extroverts are the best networkers. They may have the gift of the gab. That doesn't mean they have a particularly strong network. So Joe, things he did to build his network very powerfully at work, First of all, he was a great mentor. Second of all, he became a great manager of people and trained them, developed them so that they went off and worked in other departments. Now his network expanded. Okay. He was then known for this, that other people wanted to talk to him. He was very self-aware on the skills he wanted to develop. So when he would reach out to other people in the company, because he's like, I need to improve my sales skills, he would reach out to them and say, I understand you're the best salesperson in the company. Do you mind if I come and watch you do your job a little bit so that I can learn how to be a better salesperson? He also knew he could ask a better question by observing someone like in the role of sales. And then he became curious about what was out there. So lead, I would say for this listener to say, lead with curiosity. Understand, like, do your research maybe on what some of these other roles and things people have. Look at the bio that they have on the company website. Maybe look at their LinkedIn profile. This is, kind of the good skulking around on the interwebs. And then reach out to them saying, I'm really curious. I see that this is what your career has been within the company. I'd like to understand. How did you make this transition, right? I'm also thinking about leveraging my skill set to do this. I'd love to get your insights on how someone like me could do that. Reach out to people understanding why they are uniquely positioned, to give you advice, or why you're particularly curious about them. And then, kind of be on, so honor the time that they can give you. That's always an important thing. But lead with that curiosity. Like you're curious about them as opposed to, oh, I've been here for 11 years and I want to do something else. Help me, help me, help me. Flip it the other way. I'm curious about you. Take the light off yourself, and that should ease your way of finding answers you need.
I think that's really beautiful, very helpful, but also very beautiful advice because we're always afraid, right? Like that's the fear of networking. We're afraid, how are we perceived? How is the person going to think about me reaching out? But instead, as you say, take the light off of yourself, lead with curiosity. What a beautiful thing for someone to be asked how they've done something or to share how they've done something. I love that. Lead with curiosity. Beautiful. Kelly, we could definitely talk for several more hours or days, and we shall. But for the purposes of this episode, I just want to tell you, in addition to how grateful I am for all of your insights and generosity and humanness, I just want to tell you, every time I talk to you, there is a new lens that you give me on connecting to people. Forget even just networking. And I'm sitting here kind of eager to finish this episode because I have ideas of two people that I've thought about earlier today and I didn't do anything. There was something I just thought to share with them. Something came across my interwebs. And I really want to do that because ultimately the thing that you have inspired in me, and I think with everyone who's read your work and worked with you and listened to this episode, is it's all about human connection. And it's all about showing up in your greatest way as a human and then leading with that, honoring that. So I started by describing that cringe image of walking into a room and networking. Let's just dispel that right now. Thanks to Kelly. It's just about human connection. And I'm so grateful for you for all the work you're doing and for being the beneficiary of that, of elevating that in our world, whether it's for a purpose of transformation or reinvention or just connection. Kelly, I think we had coffee or lunch. We were trying to remember some ridiculous number of years ago in New York. And to me, the fact that we're recording this podcast is testament to that human connection, because it's like in the neighborhood of 15, 20 years later. That's ultimately networking. So that was my very, very long thank you to you for your insights and the light that you bring to this topic that I think is so essential and has such a bad rep.
I'm going to say, in a world that's rapidly changing, relationships are everything.
And on that, Thank you, Kelly. To our listeners, to take Kelly's spirit, if this episode was inspiring to you, if it was useful to you, if there's someone in your life who you think should hear it, please share it. Please leave a review or rate it. It helps other people find it and get inspired for their transformation and reinvention. And for me, to all of you, thanks for being part of Reinventability.